So constantly during 2016 and really the intervening Brexit scramble that happened almost immediately afterwards, there was a lot, I mean a lot of problems that the Brexiteers really refused to really acknowledge or even really confront with their decision to just straight up and leave the EU, even though technically, when you look at what the Leave campaign was running on, it was a very sort of soft leave with, oh, we're not going to leave the single market and customs union because, of course, only a fool would leave that. But of course, what happened? Remember, the Tory troubles always really start back in 2014 with this very small, hard right faction in their party basically growing in importance, seizing more power, and eventually taking full control, and then eventually just, well, running the party into the ground, let's face it. But shockingly, we still see elements of that happening today, with the Tory party now seriously wanting to discuss whether they want to leave the European Court of Human Rights. And of course, as we talked about constantly during the Brexit years, what does this mean, of course, for the Good Friday Agreement? And that's just, of course, Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, of course, you have territories that we have overseas, right in the Pacific region, where you have French islands, British islands, close together, but the hospital being on the French island and there being no hospital, for example, on the British island. How does that all work out, for example? All those things were, of course, hugely, hugely ignored during that time, and nowhere in more particular than, of course, with Spain. After all, you'd thought maybe Spain might be given a bit of, special treatment, just like Northern Ireland was. After all, Northern Ireland left in, the single market pretty much. Maybe they would do a similar deal for Gibraltar. After all, Gibraltar pretty much relies on a lot of Spanish workers to keep a lot of it, up and running. You'd think having a border on there, quite a significant challenge that they're going to have to try and navigate. Not only that, where does all the waste that Gibraltar generates go? Well, that goes across the border into Spain. And this was sort of silently being worked on in the background all this time, if you may remember. And then prior to the election, there were talks, finally, that Cameron, brought in as, possibly the only trustworthy person that Rishi Sunak could trust, who wasn't about to maybe, remove him from power, came in and actually tried to solve this deal. Now, again, huge problems, of course, with David Cameron, but got to give the guy credit. He actually saw this is a problem. Let's sit down and negotiate this and try and solve this and sort this out. And he nearly did it. However, what scuppered him? You may remember this because we covered this at the time as well. It was all those Brexiteers. They came out of the woodwork. You can't do this. This is giving up our sovereignty to the EU. And it pretty much torpedoed the deal. And then, of course, the general election happened. And now what have we got? Well, David Lammy pretty much has done the same deal David Cameron pretty much was about to sign in all pretty much respects. Some slight differences, but hey, it's a win-win, honestly, for everyone in this scenario. It's good for the people of Gibraltar. It's good news for them. And they have been pretty much stuck in limbo since 2016. So good news for them at least. And we'll be getting into what they get from this deal. But what is notable, of course, about this is when this was brought up in Parliament yesterday, not a single, not a single Brexiteer stood up and decried this deal, saying that it was a surrender of sovereignty, that he trotted out all those classic Brexit arguments. They weren't anywhere to be seen, not even on social media from those who had lost their seats at the previous election. That is, and I will say this now, quite a significant step forward. This is what I've been saying about the Brexit issues we would face going forward within this new administration. That would be a big positive step. That a lot of those Brexiteers just wouldn't be in Parliament anymore. Guess what? They're not there. So let's go on into this because again, this was Gibraltar, big problem for the people living there, and finally, their limbo has been lifted. That's been going on since 2016. So you can imagine some of their challenges they've been trying to face really since that referendum. So before we do though go on to that, please remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Links to my Patreon page, the one off donation link, or buy me coffee, or you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, all that good stuff, all down below. So thank you very much to all those people who help and support that. So let's go on into this. So this is the view of this deal that got signed. So 9 years ago, Gibraltar voted 96% to 4% to remain in the European Union. However, the UK's simultaneous 52-48 vote out to leave meant that Gibraltarians were now denied their own will. As not only the only British overseas territory now sharing a land frontier with the EU's border-free Schengen travel area, and now as a focus now of territorial dispute with Spain dating back from 1713, this challenge threatened Gibraltar's position with a new impasse. The economy of the Rock, now heavily dependent on the 15,000, mainly low-wage Spanish residents, who routinely crossed the border now to work there each day, faced an existential danger. Since 2016, officials from Gibraltar, Britain, and Spain in the EU have now intermittently tried to attempt to resolve all these problems. For years, the process was glacial, occasionally petulant, and in Boris Johnson's rush to leave the EU, the issue was just simply ignored. And as recently as 2013, as 2023, a hard border between Gibraltar and Spain was said to be unavoidable. This week, however, a much better deal was finally sorted. Though the detail of the text has yet to be published, it does appear now to offer the kind of frictionless border crossing for which Gibraltar and now surrounding areas are now dependent, as well as being exemplifying now the pragmatic reset with Europe now being pursued by Keir Starmer's government. The core of Wednesday's agreement is now for dual passport checks, British and Spanish now on travelling arrivals now in Gibraltar Airport. These will, of course, be very similar to the British-French checks that have now long been very familiar for the Eurostar train passengers. There will, of course, then be no checks on people and goods moving across the land border now with Spain, making Gibraltar effectively part of the Schengen area. In addition, Gibraltar's VAT-free fiscal regime will now end. The UK sovereignty over Gibraltar is, of course, unchanged, as is Spain's claim to it. The autonomy of Britain's military and naval bases is not affected. Foreign Secretary David Lammy exaggerated when he said on Thursday in the Commons that the agreement solves at least a major unresolved issue from our decision to leave the EU. That is, of course, very much surely wishful thinking. Nevertheless, Lammy's problem-solving approach has helped to make the deal possible. The agreement is, of course, very good for the Gibraltar's economy and, of course, good for EU-UK relations, and it is good for Britain's relations with Spain, whose robust economic growth rate Rachel Reeves can now only dream of matching. So, I think very good news there overall. I think very, very good news. And it even brings up the fact later on in this article, none of them led a campaign, none of them cried out about it, none of them did anything about it. It was honestly refreshing to see the way Brexit should have been handled right from the beginning, which was having proper adult conversations about what on earth, first of all, Britain was trying to do and trying to achieve, and the fact that we've got the current government who knows what it wants to try and achieve, which is a better relationship, not only with the EU, but to try and remove as many barriers as possible. Sure, it has its red lines, and we can disagree with that. That's fine. I disagree with them having those red lines there, but they've improved it. They've improved the situation phenomenally from what it was. Hasn't solved all the problems, because, as we've said before, Brexit is always going to be a thing. It's never going to not be a thing. It's never going to go away for quite probably, still a couple of years yet. But hey, much improved situation. And it's once again shows you time and time and time again that when you sit down, you talk, and you negotiate, shockingly, you can achieve all these things, which is what I've been talking about for years. And yet I've been treated as some sort of madman when I've said that such a thing could be possible. But anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.